Hi, friends. As would say, Scott Hanselman. So my name is Jérôme Laban. I'm the CTO of the Uno platform. I'm spending about an hour every week looking at what the Uno platform does and debugging, answering questions, and a few other things that are about the news in the Uno platform. And we're going to be talking about Uno Platform 3.10 that was released last week, and with a few updates that we did as well as service releases this week. And as well as taking a look at the two issues. One is going to be an xBind issue, and another one is going to be an issue with iOS. If I get to if I get to make the iOS simulator working properly with the latest Visual Studio Preview. So with Uno Platform 3.10, we released quite a few things. So this release was actually pretty large. A lot of bug fixes that we were doing for our customers. So that's a lot of them were added to this release, and many things around .NET 6. So RC1 was released, and we actually released the same day that RC1 was released. You can upgrade to the latest RC1 using the Uno check tool. So that's a derivative of the tool that's called Maui check, or it's going to be called .NET check. I'm not sure if it's going to be renamed at some point. And it's installing automatically everything that's needed to get to .NET 6 RC1 running. And I actually have one that was running here in the background for my machine that I use for the streaming. And you can see that it's installing a few things. So I ran the exact command that you can see here, the Uno check the dash preview, and it's trying to do a few things. So it looks like for some reason there's some of it that didn't work. So we can see if we can restart the check and see if it goes better. So some of the tool were there, Android is available, and some of the iOS tooling is not installing properly. Let's see if we do it one more time if it works. So that's the thing, that's the tooling that you need to run on your machine. And so the thing is that those SDKs are installed as part of Microsoft's tooling. So it's still in preview. There are a few things that may or may not still work. So that's one of the things that we can adjust. So in that case, what we're going to do is just run some of the commands manually. And you can see here it says package validations failed. So it's probably something that needs to be adjusted. Oh, and we can see that, right. Okay, so that's something that changed in between the weeks. So it says that the package now is already RTM, which we don't support yet. So we're probably going to be needing to fix a few things in the Uno check tool. But anyways, some of the things that we can do here, we can do manually. And I was actually building an application to see if everything was working properly. And one of the commands that need to be executed is the .NET workload install Android and iOS and others. So we can actually run those commands manually. So I think the Android tooling is already installed, if I remember correctly. So that one is there. We can do the same thing for iOS and the others if needed. So downloading and installing. So that's all the tools that are going to be set up properly once whether everything settles. It's not necessarily settling down for now, especially with regards to the fact that everything in this iOS and Android was postponed around next year, at least for GA. So we'll see what happens later this year with regards to all this. But still, you can do some running, and we're at Uno testing the .NET 6 runtime, and for now it's doing pretty well even on iOS and Android. So it's just a tooling that in some cases is not handling everything correctly. So that's what we're going to be looking at pretty quickly, see if that works properly. And while that installs, we can continue with the update. So there's also the support for Visual Studio 2022 Preview 4. For that one, we added a few things around our support for the hot reload parts of WebAssembly and the other targets in mobile. So that means that now you can do hot reload from Visual Studio 2022. So that works as well. We also added support for the Windows 11 Fluent styles, Sun Valley. So those styles are actually the ones that you can see when you were creating text boxes, buttons, toggle switches, radio buttons, and a few others, where the rounded corners and the colors are adjusted with a new palette. That looks pretty nice on devices and in the browser. Another thing that's to note with this is that so the selection by default is going to be version 2. So when we're talking about versions for the Fluent styles, you get the V1 that was the Windows 10 version of the styles, and then you get the version 2. And the version 2 is actually the one that is used for Windows 11. So it's called Sun Valley internally, but it's not something that is used externally. So it's going to be Windows 11 Fluent styles when compared to the Windows 10 Fluent style. So you can change between the two if you want. There's a parameter that you can set in your app.xaml that says either control resource v1, version 1 or version 2. By default, this is version 2, but you can go back and forth as needed. There's a new control that's called the WinUI info badge. That was released in WinUI 2.7. It's basically something that allows you to put a badge next to things like in a button or other controls like that. You can view the documentation here if you want to. A few additional performance improvements that we've made for iOS for all targets, and especially for Android. Now that we have .NET 6, and I made a session last week about taking a look at the profiling aspect of .NET 6. Where actually there's a guide that's available here. So if you want to profile an application, it's going to be available here. So you can follow all the steps here to start profiling your application. And what's new in and what allowed us to do some improvements in Uno for Android is that it's now possible to profile AOT-enabled applications for Android, which was not possible before. So that makes a big change because this is something that we were in the dark previously when debugging with the Xamarin Android provider, was the Xamarin provider that was there for many years, and that tool was not able to profile applications using that mode, and now we can. So that's pretty nice, and that allowed us to find some interesting hotspots when running applications, and it allowed us to bring the time the startup time down by 57%, or in some cases. Removed 300 milliseconds for parts of the startup. So that's pretty nice. Some other updates that we made were more general. So it improved the startup performance for WebAssembly as well. And then we made a few other updates in general with lots of features inside of Uno. And you can find that in the 3.10.7 releases. So many of our contributors that added some new features that was very interesting. So take a look at the release notes, and you may find what you need in those with a 3.10 release. So that's it. So that's the summary for the 3.10 release that was provided last week and an update this week. So now we're going to be taking a look at an issue that was reported actually an hour ago. And so that was pretty. It's a pretty fresh issue, and the problem here is that there's a collection issue. There's an xBind issue for which the application doesn't refresh properly when some content is loaded up. So what we're going to do is take a look at the repro itself. I'm going to detail what that means, and we're going to be taking a look at how we can fix this and hopefully learn a few things along the way. So let's dive into this repro. So I'll probably open the folder a bit too low. Let's go back up one level. There it is. Okay, so if I start the application using UWP, for instance, let's take a look at the original behavior. So every time we're doing a validation for an issue, we take a look at what UWP does, and Uno is supposed to be doing the same thing. So if it does not, then there's an issue. So that's what we're trying to fix there. So we have a combo box here, and when we click on that button, it loads up two collections in the combo box that's here. And the way it works is that we have in the main page.xaml, we have a grid and we have the combo box here, and it's data bound to the view model collection here. And that view model collection is changed as a one-way binding by either clicking the button here or one of those two buttons here. And if we take quickly a look at the main page, we can see that the view model is doing use collection 1 or collection 2, and it actually changes, it sets the property with the base view model here by providing simply just an update with the iNotify property change. So it's supposed to be doing the right thing. So now what we're going to do is take a look at the GTK version of that application and see if that does the same thing. So the original issue was reported on WebAssembly, but we can take a look at the GTK one, as this is easier to debug. Even though that changed, now it's possible to debug a bit more with WebAssembly. So now if I click the button here, we can see that there's nothing in the collection here. And if we dive a little bit into what happens when we're trying to, so one of the reasons why it happens is that there's an xload here. And xload means that the grid control is going to be loaded only when that evaluation is going to return true. So that means that there's code in there that will behave differently if the grid is set to xload and then is loaded afterwards, especially with regards to how bindings work in there. So if we take a look at the generated code here, we're going to see a few things. I don't know which one that is. Let me rebuild. It's probably something different. We'll be regenerating everything. So in the main page, if we take a look at that generated file, we're going to see the first thing that is done is that the main layout control here that is generated inside what is called an element stub. So that class is actually something that we're using internally in Uno to wrap around controls or parts of the tree that don't need to be loaded immediately, and that will be materialized when either the load function here is changed, or the load property is changed, or when there's a find name method, there is a find name that's done to go and load that specific control. So the inner of the element stub is not particularly interesting. What's interesting is what we're doing when we're generating the code for this. So we're doing a few things, and especially we're supposed to do a few things when a control is materialized. So let me put a breakpoint here. So what we're doing, we're taking a look at this, and C7 here is an element stub. So what we're doing is when we're materializing the item, when it's supposed to go visible because it's been asked to be visible, there's an event that's raised on the element stub that says the element stub is about to be removed from the tree and replaced with the actual content that needs to be displayed. So in that context, we're talking about replacing the element stub with an actual grid control with all its children. And the interesting thing here is that when we start the application and try to debug, we see that we're getting into the materialization changed event, and then we're going to the update, and then we're doing a few things, but we're not doing something that needs to be done when loading up the controls there, and it's about materializing, updating the bindings. the xbind expressions. And here was just updating the resources. So that means that we're just taking a look at updating everything that is static as static resources, but not xbinds. And we're supposed to be doing this, the bindings that update, and we're not doing it. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to try to execute that in here manually to see if I do this. Okay, so this is not, so it's not this, it's that. If I execute this and let the execution run, do I have some content updated? So yes, I do have content update this time. So this means that we're missing something here, definitely, and that xbind expressions are not materialized when we are changing the state of an x-loaded control. So we're missing a few things here. So that means that everything that's behind, and especially the combo box xbind expression that's defined here, is not executed properly. So let's go take a look at Uno and let's go try to debug this, because it's not supposed to happen. So we're going to be trying to get to the updates to add the missing piece that lets the binding updates the bindings update properly, the part that we are missing here. So let's go to the unit test, because that's the first way to validate the xbind pieces. So I do that mostly every time when we're troubleshooting Uno. We have to go into unit test first and try to see if we can actually reproduce this in that context without having to run inside of applications and things like that, because it makes it a bit more complicated to debug. Something that we're not going to be able to do if we get to if we get to a point where we can execute and test the second bug that I want to show you for this session. So we have xbind that's available somewhere. So that's for XAML Reader, xbind tests. There it is. So I think we also have one with xload. There it is. Okay. So I don't know if I'm going to be putting that in both. I think I had some xbind and xload tests in that one there as well. Okay, so we can see here that there's an xload. There are xload tests in xbind binding, but also in the Windows UI XAML, because they don't test exactly the same thing. So we're going to try to reproduce this as part of separate tests and see if we can get this running properly. Okay, so in here we're going to be duplicating one of those and make a simpler test of the original one. So let's make a copy of this one. We're going to call it xbind xload, and we're going to be calling initial maybe. And try to reproduce that one specifically. Okay. So the reason I'm doing this is because in Visual Studio, when you're adding files like this, there's a specific globbing that's defined in the project file. It makes it a bit difficult, so I don't want to have to adjust the CS project. So I'm doing it for now here. It's probably something that will be fixed in the future in Visual Studio, but it's not there yet. So let's change the XAML file to get something working in there. So what I want to do is do the same thing as was done on the other side. So we're talking about top level control. Let's put it in modifier public so we can access it from the tests. And so we're going to be loading immediately as well. And call it like this, is load. And we're going to put a text block, and we're just going to set the tag property there. There's probably no need to do anything else with that. And the property here is going to be, that's not an X tag, it's just a tag. And we're going to call this my value. Okay. So now we have this. We need a method that's called isLoad and a property that's called my value here. So the isLoad here is not the right one. We have to put a function instead. This one returns true all the time, like in the original issue. And same thing, we're going to make a property here. Let's make it simple for now. My value. Okay. That's the good one. And then let's make a small test and a small additional test for the xload. So this one's going to be called like this. Let's rename the file as well. Is the namespace the right one? Not necessarily. No, UI, xload. Okay, let's build and see if that does better. So if we go back quickly to the other one, we have Catalyst Android. And then the last one, I think it was called Wasm Tools, maybe? Wasm Tools, okay. So we don't need it specifically for Uno. It's something that's specific to Blazor. But because everything is packaged as one big support for .NET 6, it needs to come and it be installed all at once. So that's not good enough. For Uno, we'd want it to be installed, individually, but that's not the case at this point. So we hope that once .NET 6 is adjusted, or maybe once the iOS and Android support is updated, then all of this goes away, and then we don't need to install things that are not needed. So we're building everything. So you may see if you're building the Uno platform again, that now we do have two new assemblies that are packaged as part of the Uno platform. It's called the Uno UI Fluent Theme V1 and V2, and those assemblies are there to make sure that we're not packaging and not deploying into your applications themes that are not needed. And especially if you're using the V2 theme, there's no need for you to get the V1 bundled into your app. So it's referenced every time you're building, but since there's the linker running afterwards, that means that the V2 or V1, depending on what you use, is going to be removed automatically because there's no reference to it. So that's the beauty of the linking. And we're going to be doing the same thing. Let's say when Microsoft releases Windows 12 or something, then we're going to get Fluent Style V3, and we're going to be removing this at the right time. Okay, so it looks like my when xload, xbind, xload initial is not working properly. Probably I don't have the right name. What did I do? So partial, probably not the right namespace. So let's see. Let's probably just this. Yeah, it's not the right namespace. Okay. So that's good enough. So now we've built the rest. That's good. And so now what we're going to do is just call it force load on it. So that is because we're not inside of a full application. So we need to invoke some of the events that are generally called inside of applications through explicit methods. And the first thing that we want to check is is the text block does the text block exist? So when we have our text block here and we want to make it public as well, so we can reference it from the test, and we're going to do something like this. Is not null, tb01. So if it's not null, that means that it was materialized properly. And the second thing that we need to validate is that the tag property, has my value that's set to something that we want to. So the tag should be let's say it's 42 for now. Let's say it's 42. We're going to change it in there to be 42. Okay. So let's go for the build. So I'm running preview 4, and so far so good. It's working pretty well, except for the things that I wanted to have working for before the test. So I'm trying to deploy an iOS application preview 4, and it says failed to parse the plist data type, and I honestly don't know what that is. So let's try again one more time, see if that does help. So it does not. Let's go and see if it helps in the previous version of Visual Studio. So the build failed in this one. So what did fail? Non-invocable is load. Okay, so it's probably because I wrote it incorrectly at the top. So is load here. It's supposed to be invocable, but I probably wrote it the wrong way. Yes, because I made it as a property and it's supposed to be a function. So that should behave better. Let's try it again. And in the meantime, we can take a look at, see if we can actually deploy in the previous version of Visual Studio. I'm not hopeful that it will work, but we'll see. I would actually not be surprised if it's something that was opened by some of the community members for the Visual Studio. So we're going to go take a look and see if we have something available there. Okay, so is it opened? Yes, it is opened. Okay, so the test worked. So that's good. But that's a problem because it's not exactly what I wanted. So that means that it originally worked, but it's not it actually did not update properly. So we're gonna have to do something and try to find where the original sample is different from the one that we're building here. Okay, so let's see. Well, I think I see. The error message that we're seeing here is not something that is there. So I wonder. Okay, so let's take a look right away. So if you've noticed, there was a message that said that the file was downloaded from an untrustworthy source. And what likely is happening is that because the file was downloaded, then the files that are generated from it are also marked as interesting. Why is it not allowing me to do anything? Do I have it open somewhere else? Okay. Maybe there's a MS build something that's there. Let's see. Uno dot. There's a source generation host. Okay, so let's kill those for now. Manually without Haskell. And not killing things that are not supposed to be there. Okay, so let's try again. Let's remove this. Okay, so no. Okay, so let's name it for now. not okay. So that it won't let me do it. So let's do it from here. Okay, so the file is not anymore blocked. So that could be the issue. We're going to see if that actually was the source of the problems I was having when trying to build the application. I would not be surprised if that was the case. So that happens because I downloaded the file. I downloaded the file from GitHub directly, and it's probably because of this. So we're going to be just loading the app and trying to publish the content directly and see if we can get everything running from there. Okay, so let's see. So let's set this application as startup. Okay. There we go. Okay, so let's try to deploy this and see if it works. If we have a different set of errors. So we do have the same error, and it's not something that is fixed by that. Okay, so I don't know at this point, so we may not do the other issue for now. Or maybe take a look at it differently. So we can try to debug that one. Maybe there's something that we can work around, or maybe there's a workaround already. My feedback, maybe there's something. Let's go see. If we do a search, is there a search there? Visual Studio. Okay, so it's been opened by someone else. That's good. It's been triaged as well. Preview 4 specifically. Okay, there's a private something that was opened. Okay, so let's vote for that one. So preview 4, Xcode 5. Okay, so known issue somehow. Okay, so we're going to skip it for this one. Then let's go back to our test. So what we're having here is a test that passes, which is not good, because that means it's not doing the same thing as what the original issue is doing. So we're going to have to find what. So now what we can go take a look at is what are we doing in that test in the generated code that we're not doing in the other one. So we get the xbind xload initial. And let's take a look at the generated code. So the interesting part here is that the generated code is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is not calling the bindings.update. But this would mean that there's something different that needs to be done that's not done here. So I wonder, because the loaded should be doing everything properly anyways. So let's go and debug that one. Maybe it's just because of the update that's done only once. So what we can do is debug all this and put breakpoints inside this to see where the execution flow is going. So try to run that test and see if we can go and try to determine why the xbinds are not updated. So when we go here and update resource bindings, we're doing a few things. We're applying element names bindings. And then inside of that, we're only applying element name bindings. So that's not what it's supposed to be doing. We also have apply compile bindings, and that one's supposed to be called as well. So it looks like we're not invoking this for some reason. We have an apply xbind that's supposed to be invoked there. So let's go back a bit. I don't see any apply xbind that's supposed to be called. So when the control is materialized, when it's hey Dmitry, hi Abhishek, and nice to see everyone joining up from around the world. Hi from Hi, Samir. So we have all this, and now we try to find why the xBind expression is not updated. So it's likely that we're supposed to be having an invocation of the apply xBind method that's supposed to be done here, but it's not done for some reason. So we can see here that we have the apply xBind that's done here. Maybe that's the part that's missing. So let's see what we're doing in apply xBind. We're going to do apply compile bindings, apply compiled source, and then we're do apply bindings, and then we're doing all sorts of things. Okay, so that's probably, it's just not an update by itself. It's just updating the source and updating everything else. So maybe the part that's missing is that we're doing an update afterwards and it's not applied properly. So we're going to change a few things. And then in the test, instead of setting the value manually like this, we're going to go for a dependency property. I'm going to call that my value. And the owner class is this one. And what we're going to do here is we're going to change this to be another value afterwards. So we can actually change it directly from the code behind. So let's do this. Let's do this right away. Okay, so at the start, it's supposed to be 0. And then we're going to be updating the my value property to be 42. And now we expect that the tag property that we've bound to is supposed to be having 42 as well as the value. So the only thing that may not work here is that we don't have the mode, and it's supposed to be one way in that case. Otherwise, it's going to be one time, and then it's going to work only once, which is not particularly useful in that case. So let's try it again. Okay, so for this one, we can't do anything. So if you have the ability, you can, I'm going to paste that in the chat. And you can upvote that one, upvote that comment if you want. That would be very nice, because we can't debug iOS applications because of that. Okay, so why is that working? Okay, so for some reason the build stopped. Let's try it again. So in the meantime, you can probably just do a new application on the other side. And okay, so one failed. So that's good. So we expected to have 42, and oh, it was 42. So it did actually work. So we have another problem now. So that means that there's something that's supposed to not work and does. Okay. So we got everything good at this point. We got the xload working. We had the value updated, and it's not updating properly. So that means that we're definitely missing something that is specific to that control, that is supposed to work but does not. Okay, so what would that be? I wonder if it's because the view model is evaluated too early, because it's set afterwards and it's not updated. So it may be just a timing issue, in which case we may not be able to fix it right away, but have a workaround instead. So now it's initialized here, so that it's set before, so it's not the problem. So, okay, we have a view model property. Let's see when is that red. So we have a test that works, which is not good. It's supposed to be running properly, but it's not. So we have a main page here. So we're setting it. It's good. And we want to view where the get is done. Okay, so the get is not done at all. Even though the control is created explicitly. So maybe there's something else that I don't see. Okay, so not at all. It's not materialized at all. We have apply compile bindings that's done in the loading. That is supposed to happen right away. But okay, so the get of the view model is not called, even though everything's loaded synchronously. So that means that for some reason, there's something that happens in our test that actually gets the value and is not doing it in the other side. So maybe it's because it's a property instead of something else. So we're going to make a view model instead. Let's see. So we have tested with a property here. So it's a dependency property, my value. Maybe that's not the right way to do it. So let's see if we can change this. Instead of using a property, we're going to make a view model. So let's make it a view model. So we have a get set. We can remove all of this. Let's make a new class. And in our view model, we have pretty much nothing. We still need to be making it an identifier property change. And then we have to have a value inside. It's called my value. We're going to set the model the same way. So we need to set the model before the initialize component. And let's set it to 1 first. So default value should be that one and not the other one. And not 42. So we're going to change that value afterwards. For now, it's set that way. We're going to change it afterwards. So we'll see if that changes anything. So now we can't change the value that way. So what we want is 1 here for the tag, and we need to change the binding as well. So it's supposed to be model.myValue. So it's one way as well. Let's see if it works better this time. So I wanted to show you one new application using, so a few changes that we made in the Uno platform new application template. And there's a small one because it's a small change, but it's actually a big one because it changes the way that you experience the deployment of application using WebAssembly. And it's when you look inside of the project file, there's this that's been added. And in debug configuration, we're disabling the linker. So what that means is that the application is going to take a lot less time to build. But that means also that when you're building in release, then the linker is going to be enabled because it's supposed to be trimming the size of the application. But that means that you're also going to be having some issues. You may be having some issues with the application not behaving exactly the same way. So that's why we're linking to this article that explains how the linker works and what you can set into the linker configuration file. But the good thing is that when you're doing this from here and you're starting the application, now the linker doesn't run, and it's aside from the download of the runtime that needs to be done at least once, the application starts up a lot faster than previously. So that's iOS that's starting up. There it is. Okay, so the first start is a bit longer because all of the rest, but now if I make a change, I build, the application starts up, it's compiled down to something, and then the application runs. So that's a lot faster than it used to be. So that's one of the cool things that we added for Visual Studio 2022. Okay, so now we can see that the test works. So that means that the first assignation of the tag does actually work. Now we are going to be changing the model, and we're going to set the my value to something else. So this property needs to be a full property, and we need to change this so that the property change is raised because the value is different. That's too bad. IntelliCode doesn't know about all this. It knows about value, but not my value. Okay, that's not too bad, but it knows halfway through to be able to autofill the content. Okay, so now we have this, and we set the value to 42, and then it's supposed to fail. But if it doesn't fail, that means that we're still missing something from the original issue. So we're gonna have to iterate again. If I go back to this application, one thing that you need to do when you want to use the hot reload stuff is that you need to remove the HTTPS here for the debugging, and then you can go to up 7 at WASM here, or you can do you can change the you can restart IIS Express. Then you can start the application, and if all goes well and I didn't break anything, get hello world. If I update, we got the updated here. So it's updated the content. So that means that the hot reload is working properly even when running in Visual Studio 2022. That's the newest update of 3.10. So that's one of the first things I wanted to show you. I can probably show you a few other things when the test is running, and it's still not failing. So that means that there's still something else that we're not seeing that is supposed to be working but does not. Okay, so let's try to figure out something else then. So what could be different? So we can see here that the view model is not red at all. So the difference could be that there's a name on the text box. Okay, let's put a name on the combo box here. Let's see if that changes anything. Because naming things in the generator does different causes different sources to be generated, and that means that there may be different behavior, but that's not it. That's not it at all. Okay, so if I go back here, the difference is that when we're loading here, we have the getter of the model that's invoked in the test that is not invoked in the other. So let's see. If we debug again, let's see where we're going there and try to troubleshoot which sequence is getting us to be having the get executed and not in the other cases. Okay, so in here we have apply binding that's supposed to be called, and we have when the control is unloaded. Okay, so the reason everything's happening is that the first control is unloaded, so the update is done. Okay, so that makes sense. Okay, so we're actually not hooking onto the loaded event of the control. We're actually of the new control that we're creating, where we'll I see Dmitry saying Microsoft needs a new mobile OS. I would tend to agree. The problem is that the landscape has not changed much, and I think one of the reason the mobile OS failed at the beginning is mostly because there are many reasons, but one of the reasons, and the biggest one, is that the other players in the game, like Google and Apple, were not allowing for some of their apps running there to be available on their target. So that means that everything was blocked from running. So you wouldn't see any Google Maps or Apple something running on Windows Phone at the time. So that meant that people were having a hard time moving from one to the other. So there are many other reasons that were because what that happened, but still, it's something that played badly in not in favor of Microsoft. Okay, so we're gonna have to try to find why the unloaded here is not invoked on the other side. So we're supposed to be invoking this, and it may be that we're not invoking it properly on this side. So let's see. So we have the binding, so the unloaded component, and are we going into this part? If we're not, then that could be the issue. We're not. Okay. That's not good. That's not good at all. So if that happens, that would mean that we're not unloading the control properly, or something similar. So we can go from this part and try to go back a bit and see if we can repro differently. So when we're getting here, so let's download the source because we're in WASM, we're in there, so that works. So we invoke the swap views in here, but for some reason the swap didn't remove the control where it was supposed to be. So that means that we're doing something incorrectly in that case. Okay, so we're supposed to be swapping the view. So we're doing an index of. We find that the position is 0. And we're supposed to be removing the child. So we're supposed to be removing the element stub from the loaded control. Oh, I see what happens. That is very interesting. Okay, so the reason that happens is because the control is supposed to be unloaded. But because it's not loaded yet, it cannot be unloaded. So the binding cannot be removed. That's interesting. That's very interesting. So it's something that we need to change somehow. Okay, so that's something that in the test we can't really validate properly because we're not doing the right things in terms of materializing content, but we can probably do something similar. So Dmitri's saying new Windows based on Windows Core OS without Win32 shell based on UWP. Sure, maybe, but without any apps, it makes it very difficult for vendors to go there. I mean, people are gonna go and buy a phone for which their bank app is there, or their grocery store is there, or things like that. And if it's not there, then I mean, people won't buy it. So, and even then, when that happens, I don't know. I'm not seeing too many of the Surface Duo devices around. So, I mean, even though it's a very nice device. So I don't know. I mean, there are many things that make it difficult for Microsoft to get back in the game. I wish they do, but I don't know how they could. Okay, so let's try it differently this time. So when we want to test, we need to ensure that we're invoking, actually not loading everything. So the loaded should not be done here. It should be done at another point. And I'm wondering because we're having unloaded at some point, and the unloaded is not supposed to. I'm wondering. So if we start the application again, let's start a test again to see when exactly we're getting called on the unloaded, because it may not be at the right location. So we're getting called in the view model when the unloaded is happening. So we're having load change, force loaded. Okay, so when we're doing the force loaded, then the content is being removed. And that's something that we can't really manipulate from here because it's not happening immediately. Now that's a tricky one. That's a tricky one because it's not happening in the right. It's not happening in the right sequence, or the same sequence as what Windows is doing. So I don't know if we can do it immediately, if we can replicate exactly the same test in that context. So we're probably going to have to replicate that in a different setup that doesn't involve that does not involve calling force loaded in that context. And if we take a look at, we can probably do it maybe differently. So let's do this differently. If we do a grid, then we add the SUT to the grid, and then we load the grid. We can do it like that and see if that changes something. Or maybe make it loaded before, immediately when it happens. That could be something like that. Let's load the grid, and then let's add the SUT to the grid. Okay. So very quickly, something that we added, and that's something that Microsoft has been working really hard on in Visual Studio 2022. It's the hot reload stuff. So if we go to this part, so I don't know which version of the extension I do have here, but we may need to update Uno in there. Let's see. So we need to have so they changed a few things in the inside of Visual Studio, and the feature recognition is not exactly the same. So yeah, it's no, it's the right one. So if it doesn't do anything here, unloading, reloading generally helps. That's one of the few things that needs to be adjusted by Microsoft with regards to how applications are working there. And I wonder, there's something else that I didn't change. So that's probably something else that we need to adjust. Okay, so I'm going to show you what that is, because it's something that actually did change. Or we can test for this. So we can, when you click the install button here, it's supposed to be asking you to install a few things. And you need to have the .NET MAUI workload, which installs iOS, Android, Catalyst, and a few other things that are needed. And so that's that. So that's what needs to be installed. I won't be installing it right now because it will force me to close Visual Studio. So that will be for another time. But that's good. Okay, so the test passed again. So it's still not working. So we're going to have to change that and move it to something else. So Dmitry is asking why Windows UI XAML controls need to be renamed to Microsoft UI XAML controls in WinUI 3. That would be a question to ask the Microsoft team. I think they wanted to make a strong split between what Windows is doing and what the WinUI team is doing. So they have to they kind of build something out of it, because when you're building on Windows, the Windows part stays, but not the other one. So I'm not exactly sure why that is. But there's you can ask the question again in a Windows community toolkit, in the WinUI community call. Sorry. that you know, when the team is there, and you can ask why they had to do that again. Well, now it's done, so there's no way they're gonna go back. But yeah, that's what's needed there. Okay, so we don't have a fix for this one yet. So that's gonna be one of the things that we may have to look at next week, or another thing. Maybe there's going to be a new preview for Visual Studio that will fix a few of the things that we had with the iOS not deploying. So there you go. So I hope you learned a few things during this session, and I hope to see you next week. And until then, happy coding. Bye for now.